Very warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for staying with us. You're watching Plain Speak with me, Akanksha Swaroop, and we are bringing you coverage from the CNN News 18 Primetime Federal Bank studios. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, on being elected for the third time, has chosen to make his first bilateral visit to Russia, which clearly indicates the priorities that New Delhi is according to this partnership of trust. But without mincing words, Prime Minister Modi said that war was not a solution. Clearly, he was referring to the war in Ukraine. And without naming Ukraine, Prime Minister Modi mentioned the attack on a children's hospital. He said that seeing the bodies of children is very heartbreaking. On Monday, Ukraine's largest children's hospital suffered a massive attack as blasts ripped through the building. While Moscow has denied the role in this attack, several European nations have slammed the power behind this attack. In fact, the US State Department was quick to raise concerns with India regarding its relationship with Russia. But Prime Minister Modi's direct message for President Putin has shut many critics. There's no doubt that there's a perceptible bonhomie between Putin and Modi. They have met several times and spoken on several occasions on issues of mutual concerns as the global geopolitical scenario remains in flux. More importantly, there remains a historic trust in the strength of bilateral interests and several critical areas which act as drivers for the uniqueness of this strategic partnership. The visit also coincides with the NATO summit in Washington, dominated by the Ukraine war. So has Prime Minister Modi navigated India's diplomacy challenge? That's a big question we'll be answering with our guests today. But before we do that, during this visit, a key breakthrough has been achieved by Prime Minister Modi during his talks with President Putin. Russia has agreed to discharge and facilitate the return of all Indians working in the Russian army. Apart from this, India is to open 2 more consulates in Russia. Now, let's also take you through the key issues that came up during the talks and what it means for India. First and foremost is correcting the trade deficit. New Delhi is now expected to increase its exports to Moscow. How will it do that? By ramping up selling of commodities, spare parts, technological exports in exchange for oil imports from Russia. Remember, our imports from Russia are higher than the exports that are sent over to Moscow. At the same time, uranium supply pact, it remains a key concern because nuclear plants in India will now be getting a major boost. Why so? It will be beneficial for the nuclear power plant coming online in the southern state of Tamil Nadu. What is going to be the aspect on defense agreement? The S-400 surface-to-air missile will be providing India with security cover on both eastern and western borders. Moreover, the militaries of both the countries will be using each other's facilities for training, port calls, and humanitarian assistance and disaster relief operations as well. Military Logistics Pact is also a key part of the agenda between Moscow and New Delhi. It will facilitate the exchange of fuel and spare parts for Russian warships in the Indian Ocean region and Indian vessels in the Arctic. At the same time, Prime Minister Modi has also lauded Russia's efforts to assist India with fertilizer and food security that will ensure the interests of Indian farmers and boost food supplies in India's agricultural sector. At the same time, another inevitable aspect of this bilateral relationship is the energy sector. Amid rising prices, there's been a consistent push for long-term crude supplies. Let's not forget, it was Prime Minister Narendra Modi's first visit to Russia since the war broke out. And Prime Minister has once again advocated for peace and not war during his meeting with President Putin. Let me take you through those key aspects of this meeting that has taken place. Prime Minister Modi has highlighted that he held open talks on Ukraine and told President Putin to respect United Nations Charter on territorial integrity and reminded him that no solution can be found on battleground, only through dialogue and diplomacy, while reiterating that both of them, dialogue and diplomacy, are the way forward. Prime Minister has also said that the killing of innocent children is heart-wrenching. Of course, he was referring to that attack on the children's hospital in Kiev. Prime Minister has also met Vladimir Putin on the sidelines of SCO summit, where he told him that this is not the era of war, but of dialogue, diplomacy and democracy. Well, this was in the SCO summit back in 2022, not this year, because remember, Prime Minister did miss it. Prime Minister reiterated that he should come together and do whatever is possible to stop the bloodshed and human sufferings, especially in the war in Ukraine. Now, Prime Minister Modi in Russia, and from war to business, India's diplomacy challenge, has that in fact been met by the Indian Prime Minister? That's a big question that we'll be probing today.
मैं बिना संकोच कह सकता हूं कि इन 25 साल की हमारी इस गहन यात्रा के मुख्य सूत्रधार आप रहे हैं, और मैं आपको विश्वास दिलाता हूं कि, और पिछले अनुभव से मैं कह सकता हूं कि आने वाला भी हमारा कार्यकाल हमारे संबंधों को और गहरा बनाएगा और घनिष्ठ बनाएगा, और हम नए नए अचीवमेंट को लेकर के आगे बढ़ेंगे। एक मित्र के नाते मैंने हमेशा कहा है कि हमारी भावी पीढ़ी के उज्जवल भविष्य के लिए शांति सर्वाधिक आवश्यक है, लेकिन मैं ये भी जानता हूं कि युद्ध के मैदान में समाधान संभव नहीं होता।
Has India managed to navigate that diplomacy challenge? That's a question I'll be posing to my esteemed panelists today. I'm joined in by Mr. Shashank, who's the former Foreign Secretary at the MEA, Mr. Sushant Sareen, who's a Senior Fellow at the ORF, Tatiana Kukareva, who's a Senior Journalist, Ruslan Botnik, who's the Director of Ukrainian Institute of Politics. Many thanks to you, Tatiana, and the gentleman for joining in. Mr. Shashank, if I could begin with you, first things first. How do you assess Prime Minister's own stance when it comes to Ukraine? He's clearly, without mincing words, told the Russian president that the solution of the war does not lie on the battlefield. How do you view India's balancing act?
Well, it's not a question of balancing act only. India has always said that war is no solution to any issues. Ultimately, war also has to then be followed by dialogue and diplomacy. And therefore, India has been constantly, Prime Minister Modi has been constantly talking about that this is not an era of war and we have to go for dialogue and diplomacy, the UN Charter and all those kind of things, to which we are all committed. Now, as far as the issues are concerned right now, I think on one hand, yes, countries are talking about controlling the war and moving towards diplomacy, but then everyone feels that they are in a better position, and so they should be given the solution according to their wishes. So therefore, a solution is not possible. The Americans and the Western Europeans have said that they will continue to give whatever support is needed, whatever weapons are needed. So there is no question of any kind of a dialogue end to war from their side, till Russia withdraws from every other place and they are able to take Ukraine into NATO, Ukraine into European Union, and put all their missiles on the Russian border. So that is their demand. Russia says that whatever they have already won has to remain with them. Now, in this situation, Narendra Modi can only say that we have to try to persuade all the parties to the conflict to come to a negotiating table. Recently, we saw that in Switzerland, some meetings took place. They wanted India to be there, but they were not really trying to find a solution which would be acceptable to the Russians. So Russians did not attend it. So there it is. So ultimately, Prime Minister Modi is trying to find a common ground if that is possible.
Absolutely. Tatiana, if I could bring you in, if you heard what Mr. Shashank had to say, he's made a significant point. The dialogue and diplomacy may seem a little far-fetched at the moment, but remember how crucial it is in terms of diplomacy for the Indian Prime Minister also, because on one hand, he's being also very keenly watched by the NATO summit, not to forget the kind of reactions that have already come in from the Ukrainian president and of course the US State Department as well. How do you see this now shaping up for India and Russia, considering we've already managed a lot on the negotiating table when it comes to all the deals that have been struck?
Well, this is and I did hear what Mr. Shashank said. I agree with a lot of what he said, because the problem right now is not even the fact that, yes, negotiations are crucial. And the problem here is the same narrative that we've been hearing from the West for 2 years now. Unfortunately, right now, it doesn't include Russia at all. We're talking about negotiations, but the Western parties are trying to make negotiation happen without Russia at the table at all. And that's never going to happen. You need to, there are two sides to every conflict, and the two sides in this case have to be present. President Putin has said that he's open to negotiations on Ukraine back in 2022. Unfortunately, nobody's heard it. And the problem with the Western narrative is that it only applies to Western doctrine. There's a Western doctrine. They want everything done the way the State Department says it. The State Department has the audacity to say that Narendra Modi has to say something to President Putin. I'm sorry to say that, but, Prime Minister of India doesn't have to say anything.
All right.
And he doesn't have to respond to the US.
All right. Point taken. Ruslan, you're talking at a time when you're seeing a very changing global order. You have Iran, Russia, China, and on the other hand, you have the Western Front. And India, of course, as the the leading voice for Global South, has a very tricky diplomatic tightrope walking to do. And the Indian External Affairs Minister has consistently maintained that we believe in multipolarity in the world and we're not living in the times of non-alignment. So taking that multipolarity into view, why should India in fact be even working towards pacifying certain global voices?
Hello, colleagues. For me, it looks like for now, India is still not aligned country, and India is not ready in role for a peaceful negotiator between the Russian and Ukraine, between the West and East. India is trying to be out of this situation and seeking for her own economical and political goals. And of course, in Ukraine, we are very disappointed. Our leadership is very disappointed of visit of Indian Prime Minister to Russia and his words about the friendship with Russia and so on, because we were waiting for a more balanced position, maybe for more non-aligned position. At the same time, for me, like an expert, I am clearly understand that India go to Russia for economical reasons, because you have a huge economical trade, you have a huge political and economical and military and other interest. And in this situation, Ukraine is not able to propose for India or for another big South global countries something else, something other which Russia could propose. It's our weak position, but we are still waiting maybe for more prosperous and more active India's international policy. Maybe we will be waiting for India's peaceful plan for Ukraine. We have Chinese, for example, peaceful plan for Ukraine. Maybe India will show us something more, and it will be very good for Indian-Ukrainian relation now to make a call or another communication between Ukrainian and India's government after this visit.
So, Shant, how do you weigh in on the Ukrainian expectation of perhaps coming up with a peace plan? That is what's my reading of it, because that is at least what Beijing had offered to do when, President Xi Jinping met up with President Putin the last time. But How much of that is a real possibility? On one hand, India is talking about being the leading voice for the global south. On the other hand, we also have our own time-tested ties with Moscow.
So, Akanksha, I think we need to be very clear about one thing. Like every other country in the world, which includes Americans, it includes the entire West, it includes every other country, including Ukraine. If India watches out for her own economic and political interests, I don't see what's the problem with that. Number
Yes.
one, let's get that out of the way. And yes, we have a defense relationship with the Russians. We increasingly have an energy security relationship with the Russians. There is a certain amount of trust and confidence that we have between India and Russia. And those are assets as far as India is concerned. And I don't see any reason why just because somebody doesn't like Russia anymore, India is supposed to, walk away from that. Secondly, and I think more importantly, because we have a political and a diplomatic capital with the Russians, how many leaders in the world can sit with Mr. Putin and as a friend tell him that, look, maybe you need to start looking at this entire war in a certain way, and maybe we should try and think of some way out of this conflict. How many people can do it? Is the Western approach, which is of hectoring, which is of ostracizing, which is of isolating Russia, which is of, even going down to the level that Russian players can't play, Russian music is not acceptable, Russian art is something that, is no longer acceptable. Is that level helpful in ending war or resolving a crisis or promoting a diplomatic solution? Or is the Indian approach that, look, yes, Ukraine is a friend, Russia is a friend, this is not a war we endorse, this is not a war we like, this is not a war we think is in anybody's interest.
Right.
And this war comes to an end, the better it is. So we are trying to, counsel whoever will listen to us that this is the path you need to follow. Now, should we have a peace plan? I think a peace plan is not very helpful until and unless both the protagonists, that means Ukraine and Russia, forget everybody else, Ukraine and Russia have to be ready to sit on a table and talk it out. And the first step for that has to be some kind of a ceasefire, something which the Prime Minister alluded to when he says that, look, as long as a war is going on, you can't really be thinking about peace. So I think the message was there needs to be some kind of a pause in this conflict so that the two sides can come together. And until both the sides can come together, all peace plans are basically nothing more than virtue signaling as far as I am concerned.
Absolutely. Virtue signaling is, in fact, a good way of looking at it. But Mr. Shashank, why only place all expectations, the burgeoning expectations rather, on New Delhi, whether it comes to controlling our imports of crude oil, whether it comes to cutting down our defense supplies from Moscow, keeping in mind that 60% of our own defense equipment are still of Russian make. Having said that, why is only New Delhi expected to make those cuts when it comes to our own bilateral ties with Moscow?
I think there was some kind of misreading of the Indian intentions when India joined the Quad and decided to join hands with the Western countries, joined the G7 extended dialogues. In G20, they became very keenly involved that if they were not getting the UN Security Council permanent membership, at least they should try to put their voice in various forums, including the forums set up by the Western countries. Now, the point is that the Western countries, especially America and UK and France, they have been insisting that whatever decisions they take, and I'm sure that they themselves do not know what are the decisions that they are taking, because there is an internal debate going on in all these countries that their leaders do not know what is the end solution that they are thinking in terms of Ukraine, Russia. And Ukraine is not able to tell them anything. Every time Ukraine says that, all right, we would like to try to have a dialogue, have peace, Chinese offer something, the global South offers something, South Africa had said something. But then Ukraine is not able to move forward because there are people who say, no, we will give you $6 billion worth of armament. Let more Ukrainian people die. Let more Ukrainian children die. But they have no end plan. So therefore, India is there setting up its own position that, all right, we want a solution by diplomacy and dialogue. Now, what was happening is that the way the Americans and the other, they were putting pressure on India to cut down their ties, with Iran, cut down their ties with Russia, that Chinese were becoming very, very powerful, and they were putting pressure on Pakistan to trouble India in the internal affairs. They were trying to put pressure on Russia by becoming their major trading partner. So therefore,
all right, I think we seem to be losing out on Mr. Shashank's connection. While we do that, Tatiana, a lot is talked about how much importance and significance has Indian Prime Minister placed on Russia being his first bilateral visit ever since he's taken over as the Indian Prime Minister for a third time. What does that now speak of India's own ties and the significance that it's bestowing on Russia? And does that give New Delhi a unique position to bargain in this overall geopolitical scenario at a time when, China is also drawing its own clout out of this relationship it has with Russia?
That's a good question, but just let me very, very briefly, take you back to about 10 minutes ago, something that your Ukrainian guest said that was very, very important, but we kind of, it gets missed in all of the rest that is said. Look, he said, look, India is still a non-aligned country. I don't remember Prime Minister Modi ever stepping away from the non-alignment idea. But when he says, look, we need a more balanced peace plan. So you see, the balanced peace plan means
in fact,
alignment.
India's taken it a step forward. We believe in multipolarity because that's what the times of today are. And non-alignment is in fact a more obsolete belief. That is something that's almost been acknowledged by India's own External Affairs Minister.
And this is exactly the answer to your question. And this is what doesn't sit well with the West, because the US and its, Ukrainian proxies who have been at least very well educated in these 2 years that we've spent in this conflict, they don't play in that scenario. They don't understand the multipolarity. They still want to be the only world superpower telling other people what to do. The Prime Minister Modi is stating a very clear position. It is a politics of non-alignment. It is an idea of taking its own path for India. And that doesn't sit well with the West. The West is not ready for India to be non-aligned or to be unbalanced in the sense where it's not aligned with the West. Right. This is what's not working here.
Now, coming to the entire aspect of bilateral ties, I'd like to take in a word from you as far as India placing that importance on Russia as Prime Minister has made that first bilateral visit after the formation of the new government. How important what does it speak in terms of diplomacy?
It is an important relationship, and it is an important relationship in terms of diplomacy and in terms of other things. You said you broke it down before we set out to debate, you broke down the nuclear aspect of the cooperation. There's a lot of things at stake, and it's an incredibly important relationship in terms of the empowerment of the global south, as well as just, a Russia-India relationship.
Where skeptics are questioning, Tatiana, is that with the war going on, where does this leave defense cooperation? Will Russia prove to be a reliable defense partner? Because till October and December of 2023, Russia itself had admitted that there is going to be delay in supply of weaponry because they are prioritizing that supply for the war in Ukraine. Where does that now leave Moscow in terms of reliability as a defense partner?
In terms of the skeptics, there are the same people who said that by 2024, Russia is going to be in shambles and, there's going to be a Ukrainian flag in the Russian capital. This is the same set of people who always tend to say, over-dramatize something to shake up this relationship and to make that seed, plant that seed of distrust between the two sides to that relationship.
All right, Ruslan.
It's the same story.
All right, Ruslan, let's now talk about the West. There's a lot of doublespeak emanating, especially out of the United States. When you talk about, let's get into history, nuclear bomb in Japan by the United States, not to forget the drone strikes that have been taking place in Afghanistan in the past. There was, in 2015, a children's hospital that was bombed by the United States in Afghanistan. Not to forget the casualties in Iraq. Many have said that this is a white man's war, which is why it is getting getting the kind of attention it is. Otherwise, what happened to West Asia? Nobody talked about it.
Every war, it's a lot of criminal doings, to be honest. In every war, we have a lot of...
Yes, but how many times did Ukraine, in fact, speak up when these bombings were taking place in West Asia?
I don't know. You sent me a very hard question. I don't know. I haven't leaded this question. And we are fighting for our independence, and we are looking only for our situation. And you're right, maybe in this situation, sometimes we are looking like a newborn child from geopolitical terms, because we are trying to offense all our previous experience, political and military experience of the world. But now we have only our deal and only our fatum. Also, I want to add to the situation that you need to understand that India is more important for Russia than Russia for India in this moment, because Russia is becoming more and more dependent of China. And India could be like a second leg for Russian body international trade. So Russia is trying to lower her dependence from the China, developing the cooperation with India in this moment. Not only with India, but also with Turkey, with other countries, which they are looking around the world. And of course, India has a good chance to a good bargain from the Russian Federation this moment, and Premier Minister Modi trying to use this situation.
I'm glad you highlighted that, Ruslan, because that's exactly the multipolarity that we were talking about. Because Sushant, I'd like to bring you in, just like the way the West needs India, especially the United States, to sort of counterbalance China's clout in South Asia. The fact of the matter is that Russia too needs New Delhi as much as it depends on Beijing.
And that is precisely the reason why the West should not be so bloody-minded about Russia. Because as far as the West is concerned, the really big strategic struggle is not against Russia. Russia was very keen for very good relations with the West. It was the West which was pushing and needling Russia needlessly. So, if Russia is looking at India to counterbalance China, I think the West should be celebrating that this kind of a thing is happening. And this is precisely what we have been trying to convince the West, that look, if you are going to be pushing Russia into the Chinese embrace, you are not helping your own cause in that larger strategic struggle that you are looking at. Russia on the side of China is a strategic disaster as far as we are concerned. This is precisely what we are trying to convince them of. But somehow, the European mind seems to be impervious to this logic, because they've always looked at Russia as this big bad wolf which is going to come and gobble them all up. That's not the case, really, at least from the way we look at it. And frankly, if the West was to, step back a little bit, look at the geopolitical map, the geostrategic map, they would understand where India is coming from. Something we have told them on numerous occasions, but somehow, it's a fossilized, impervious kind of a mindset which simply does not get this.
All right. Let me quickly take one from Tatiana before I end with Mr. Shashank's closing thoughts. Tatiana, when you talk about the historical strength of India-Russia ties, this is one relationship which is defined by strategic autonomy. And when you look at that, how critical is that in terms of a partnership? Because, these are two countries which have learned to respect each other's autonomy and their own global stances. So if Moscow can do that for New Delhi, why can't that be done by Washington or even, say, Brussels?
Unfortunately, because Russia was, we never colonized the continent, we kind of focused on our own. This is very much, to me, as a person who's keen on history, this is very much a colonial kind of state of mind. You sit in Washington and then you think of yourself as this supreme being who is has the right to tell other people what to do, and then you can't.
No, I don't think we can talk about colonizing right now, especially at a time when Russia has called on that war on Ukraine. So it's unfair to talk about colonizing. Let's respect territorial sovereignty.
And let's not mix two things together. Not every war is colonization.
But it is also about territorial sovereignty and respecting the independence.
Look,
but I truly hope that
it's a very different concept of feeling yourself as a superpower and then you can't go down to the level or go up to the level where you think that you can sit with other superpowers.
The definitions are different, but bloodshed must come to an end, and that's why I'd like to, in fact, end with Mr. Shashank's thoughts. I'm sorry, Tatiana, I'm running short of time. Mr. Shashank, let's also now have some closing thoughts. I do see that it's been very closely contemplated, the visit to Austria. Prime Minister has already said that there are commonalities between both the nations because they uphold the values of pluralism and democracy and the ideals of democracy. Can Austria offer something in terms of, sort of towing that diplomatic tightrope walk between the West and India at the moment?
Well, Austria has been an old friend of India, and India was there when Austrian neutrality was respected by both sides. So therefore, there is an old relationship. In fact, I'm surprised that our Prime Minister is going there after 40 years. 41 years. So therefore, there is this issue that the Central European countries, which have seen waves of immigration coming in from the Middle East, where bombing has been going on by the West, by the Americans and the NATO countries. Therefore, we see that, yes, there is a problem that countries like India, which are democracies, they face because a lot of illegal migrants come in from outside. Secondly, the people they try, which are not democracies, real democracies, like Pakistan or China, they are trying to foist a two-front war on India, a conflict on India, by trying to destabilize the internal situation in the country. Americans have not been very helpful in that regard. So people in India are feeling that we must find friends in Europe and friends in Asia who understand us. And I'm glad that African countries have joined G20 when India tried it. So therefore, there's a global South bloc which is going on, and India's wishes that we must have a diplomacy and dialogue solution to the Ukraine issue would be acceptable after the elections take place in USA. And England is trying to now focus and improve in following whatever they have been doing in the past. But I think the Americans who have to work out, do they want peace or do they want to have only continuing war all the time?
All right. Ruslan, I give you 30 seconds. Please share your closing thoughts on the possibility of dialogue and diplomacy for the war in Ukraine.
I think negotiation is started already, but everybody is waiting the ending of presidential election in the United States. Because we need guarantees for any agreement, and without new president of the United States, we will not be able to take these guarantees.
Would you admit that US is playing a very significant role in funding this war?
A lot of countries. It's a three-level war. It's geopolitical war also, in any case. So we need new president of the United States to sign this agreement.
I'm very happy you say that. Do you think that a change of guard in the United States, and if it is not President Biden, will spell the end of this war?
It suits also for other sides, for China also, for many other countries, not only for the United States.
All right, many thanks to you, Ruslan. Here's in fact coming to the end of this discussion. We do hope that a solution is worked upon as far as that war in Ukraine is concerned, and that it should not just be coming in from the leader of global South, that is India. Perhaps US and the EU can play a more supportive and beneficial role in fact, marking the end of that war. And